Today, we are diving deep into 8 of the most intense and dramatic verses you'll find anywhere in the New Testament. Matthew chapter 24. Jesus is on the Mount of Olives, and he starts telling his disciples about a catastrophe on the horizon. But here's the big question. Was he talking about the end of the world, or was he talking about the end of their world? Let's get into it. So, verse 21 just throws us right into the deep end, doesn't it? It's a staggering claim. Jesus predicts a great tribulation, a time of suffering so intense, so unique, that nothing before or after would ever compare. I mean, that is a huge statement. So you have to ask, what exactly was he describing? And maybe more importantly, when did he say all this was going to happen? All right, so these first 2 verses of the passage, 21 and 22, they really set a terrifying stage. They're describing a calamity that has no parallel in history, an event so utterly destructive that it would actually require divine intervention just to keep everyone from being wiped out. And what's so fascinating is how the sources immediately connect this prophecy to a very specific historical event. They argue that when Jesus talks about the Great Tribulation, he isn't describing some far future apocalypse. Nope. He's making a direct reference to the First Jewish-Roman War, which, as we know, ended with the complete and utter destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD. And if you look at the historical accounts, you realize this wasn't hyperbole. Not at all. During the siege of Jerusalem, you had this horrific combination of infighting, mass starvation, and then the final Roman assault. The death toll was just genuinely unprecedented for the Jewish nation. It was a total societal collapse, and it perfectly matches this prophecy of a calamity without equal. Then verse 22 adds this really interesting layer of hope right in the middle of all the horror. The destruction would be so total that without some kind of intervention, literally no one would survive. But, and this is a big but, for the sake of the elect, those days of suffering would be cut short. So let's see how this connects to the actual historical timeline. Okay, so this timeline really gives us a clear map of the whole conflict. Now look at that first event in 66 AD. This is wild. The Roman general Cestius Gallus has Jerusalem surrounded, and then, for reasons nobody can really explain, he just withdraws. This created a small window of opportunity for the Christians, the elect, to actually listen to Jesus' warning and get out of the city, which the sources say they did. After that, the war just escalates until that final brutal siege in 70 AD. So what does shortening the days really mean here? Well, the historian Josephus, who was an eyewitness to all of this, wrote that when the Romans finally broke through the city walls, the slaughter was just indiscriminate. But he says the killing eventually slowed down, and it wasn't out of mercy. It was because the soldiers themselves became sick of it, just disgusted by the sheer scale of the killing. So, in a way, their own exhaustion and revulsion shortened the days of the massacre, and that's what prevented a total, complete annihilation. Okay, so we've got the stage set with all this chaos and destruction. Now in verses 23 through 26, the prophecy shifts gears to a really critical warning. See, in times of desperation, people become incredibly vulnerable to deception, and Jesus foretells that a lot of deceivers were going to try and take advantage of all that turmoil. And you really have to notice the power of this warning in verse 24. These weren't going to be simple con artists. No, they would perform great signs and wonders, things so convincing that even the very elect, the most faithful followers, were at risk of being fooled. This was like the ultimate red flag for his followers. And this just goes to show you, Jesus' warning wasn't some abstract idea. I mean, look at this list. The sources, including the historian Josephus and the Book of Acts, they document all these different figures who rose up during this exact period, claiming to be messiahs or prophets, gathering followers, and, well, usually leading them to their doom. This was a very real, very present danger. Man, this quote from Josephus is just chilling. During the final siege, a false prophet, who was actually encouraged by the city's leaders to keep people from deserting, told thousands of people to gather on the temple roof and wait for a miraculous rescue. But instead of a rescue, the Romans set fire to the building and every single one of them perished. It's deception with the most tragic consequences imaginable. So in verse 26, Jesus gives his followers a super simple test. These false messiahs, they would all rely on secrets and rumors. You know, hey, he's out in the desert, or he's hiding in the secret chambers. And Jesus' command is just blunt. Believe it not. Why? Because the real event would be the exact opposite of a secret. And that brings us to the famous and really symbolic verse 27, which describes the nature of what Jesus calls the coming of the Son of Man. The imagery here is just so powerful. Unlike the secret meetings of the false prophets, this event would be like a bolt of lightning that flashes across the entire sky, visible to everybody all at once. It wouldn't be a whispered rumor. It would be this undeniable public spectacle. So, according to the sources, this coming is not a physical return from the clouds. It's a coming in judgment. The destruction of Jerusalem and its temple in 70 AD, that was the lightning flash. It was a sudden, catastrophic, and very public judgment on the nation that was visible for the whole world to see. You couldn't mistake it. You couldn't hide it in some secret chamber. Okay, we've now arrived at the final, and kind of cryptic, verse in this passage. Verse 28 gives us this concluding image of judgment, and it uses a really stark and memorable proverb. Now, this is a proverb. It's a simple law of nature that pretty much everyone back then would have understood. A dead body is going to attract scavengers. It's inevitable. But in the context of this prophecy, Jesus gives this old saying a very specific and very ominous new meaning. So if the proverb is a metaphor for the judgment coming on Jerusalem, we just have to solve the puzzle, right? What is the carcass and who are the eagles? And here, this is where it all just clicks. The sources reveal this stunning conclusion. The carcass represents the nation of Judea, which is being framed as spiritually and politically dead in its rebellion. And the eagles? Well, that's an unmistakable reference to the Roman legions. Their military standard, the one they carried into every single battle, was the Aquila, the eagle. The proverb becomes a prophecy. Where the dead nation lies, the Roman eagles will gather to consume it. So when you put it all together, the crucial takeaway here, according to the sources, is that Jesus was giving a very clear warning about an event that was going to happen within his disciples' own lifetimes. He even told them, "This generation shall not pass till all these things be fulfilled." This whole prophecy wasn't about the literal end of the planet. It was about the end of their world, the complete destruction of the Jewish nation and its temple in 70 AD. And that leaves us with one final thought to chew on. When we anchor a prophecy like this one in its specific historical time and place, when we see it as a direct message for a particular people facing a very particular crisis, how does that change the way we read and apply its message in our own time? It's definitely a question worth thinking about.